Welcome back. Today, we're going to do another deep dive and review. This time, we'll be talking about Star Wars Dark Forces. Now, the original Dark Forces game was developed and published by LucasArts and released in 1995 for MS-DOS and Mac, with a PS port eventually arriving in 1996. Now, my personal history with this game stretches all the way back to 1995 when I first played it as a little kid. Back then, it was a bit of a process in order to launch games from the MS-DOS program. You had to manually enter commands into the program in order to launch software off of it. And although the exact commands for running Dark Forces are lost in the annals of time, based off my hazy memory of my 9-year-old memory, it was something along the lines of c:\\df.run.exe, something like that. But there are probably other command prompts involved, but every time I had to do that, every time I had to launch from that program, it felt awesome. I felt like a hacker. Felt like I deserved to play that game. Now, a lot of people tend to categorize and classify Dark Forces as a Doom clone, but I highly disagree with this statement. Although it does draw clear inspiration from Doom, it is an iterative and almost evolutionary improvement in every system and mechanic that Doom introduced in 1993. Although it may have been a bit rudimentary and sluggish, it did introduce the ability to aim up and down along the Y-axis. While it may not seem significant nowadays, the ability to aim up and down introduced the concept of verticality and the ability to maximize effectiveness of the perceived three-dimensional arenas in which combat took place. Speaking of verticality, Dark Forces also introduced layers within levels. In previous games, rooms were attached to each other and there was no real verticality. But in Dark Forces, you could take elevators down to the floor below and be directly underneath the floor you were just on. LucasArts was able to accomplish these advances by using their own proprietary engine, which is the Jedi engine. Other advances that Dark Forces introduced to the first-person shooter genre are the abilities to crouch and the ability to jump. Prior to that, we didn't make full use of these 3D spaces that we saw. It also introduced platforming to the genre, as well as equipment, even though some of the equipment may be limited to certain levels, such as this level where the ice is slippery and difficult to walk on. Once you unlock the ice cleats, you're able to gain some traction and more effectively traverse the ice. As you can see on the front of the screen, the gas mask is one of those pieces of equipment that is limited to a certain area of a level, and as you can see, it's conveniently placed where there's toxic fumes. Other equipment that you're going to use more readily include the night vision goggles, as well as the headlamp. The NVGs are going to give you that green screen where you can see further, while the headlamp kind of limits the area that it illuminates to right in front of you. One of the cool effects though is that when you shoot a weapon, it kind of lights up the area around you. So even if you don't have a headlamp, you can recon by fire. There's a very common saying that says tracers work both ways. Well, here, it's the same thing. The flash of each weapon works both ways. So you can see whenever the enemies fire that they light up the area around them as well. Dark Forces also introduced the ability of lasers to bounce off certain surfaces. In addition, it kind of had a rudimentary introduction to environmental destruction. It's no geomod, but it's a great way of finding hidden stashes. Perhaps the greatest strength of Dark Forces lies in the use of its IP. It was a wonderful way of experiencing Star Wars in the 90s and immersing yourself into that universe. We hadn't had any movies in a long time, and Dark Forces perfectly encapsulated that essence of Star Wars. Part of the way it was able to do this is through textures in environments. Even as some of those textures were super basic, I knew I was in Star Wars at all times. Whereas in Doom, I didn't know where in the hell I was. It also did so through sound design. A lot of it sounded just like the movies. As you can tell by the blurriness, blockiness, and pixelation of graphics, that was from the original. Now Night Dive came in and did an excellent remaster of this game. The graphics are crisp and clean, the movement, including the ability to look up and down, are so much smoother, and the controls are updated from modern consoles. They were able to capture everything great about this game without compromising the integrity of the original vision. The existence of this absolutely perfect remaster is a hallmark in game preservation, and highlights both the importance of Night Dive and the Kex engine. I can't emphasize enough how amazing this is. But without further ado, let's dig a little deeper into this deep dive and review. A good starting point to fire off from in a first-person shooter would probably have to be with the weapons, and we're going to start off with none other than the modified Briar Pistol. You start out with this weapon, and there's only one mission in the game where you're without it. It is a semi-automatic laser pistol that packs a decent amount of firepower, but is slow to fire. Conversely, if you want a higher rate of fire, you can always go with the Stormtrooper rifle, which we all know and love as the E11 blaster. Now, while the first several shots out of the barrel have a very tight grouping, if you hold that trigger down, that spread is going to go wild. Secondly, you're using 2 rounds of ammo per shot, so you're pretty much using quadruple the amount of ammo. However, their ammo is readily available, and this weapon served as the workhorse of my playthrough. Next, we have the Imperial Repeater, which I like to call the Wasp. This little thing packed a hell of a sting. This little beast uses power cells as ammunition, but it only uses 1 round per shot, has a very rapid rate of fire, very tight grouping, and is accurate at long distances. It also has a secondary fire that fires 3 rounds at once. Next up, we have the Jaren Fusion Cutter. This shot green rounds and had markings that made it look like a construction gun. It used the same type of ammunition as the Imperial Repeater, which are power cells, and also had a secondary fire that launched all 4 tubes at once. Now you pick this thing up on the level where there's an Imperial mine. A lot of safety issues, so I like to call it workman's comp. Your insurance company will return your phone call in 2 to 3 weeks. Next up, we have the Stalker Concussion Rifle, which is one bad mamba jamba. This Titan uses 4 rounds of power cell ammo per shot. However, it is capable of targeting multiple enemies at once. And when you run into those multiple enemies, a group of them, it lights up the battlefield and raises it in a blue hellstorm. However, should something get in your way, that damage is going to get reflected right back at you. Probably best to avoid use in close quarters. Because he's holding a thermal detonator! This is a thermal detonator. It is a Star Wars grenade made famous by Return of the Jedi when Leia, dressed as a bounty hunter, threatens Jabba with it. Our protagonist, Kyle Katarn, has a hell of an arm, and you can take out single enemies at a distance. Want to take out more than one enemy? Sure, lob it into a group of them and watch them fly away. Now, there's also a secondary fire that has a timer instead of exploding on impact, where you can have a lot of fun with it. Still not interested? Well, you can invite your Stormtrooper friends over for a fun game of Toss the Grenade. Just make sure that you're the one throwing it and they're the one catching it. If you're tired of lobbing grenades, you can also lay IM mines. I don't know what IM stands for, maybe AOL Instant Messenger, based off the sound it makes. Listen closely. You've got mines. I'm just kidding, yours don't make any sound other than explosions and death. But if you approach an enemy mine, it makes a distinguishable chirp. Next up, we have the Packard Mortar Gun. This thing lob it like it's hot. It shoots mortars. It basically launches mortars at enemies and causes a large explosion. One of the benefits of it is it lobs it at an arc so you can take out enemies above you or behind a ledge. Very useful in a 3-dimensional battlefield. And finally, we have the Assault Cannon, which I called the Monarch Gun. Why? Because it looks like a monarch butterfly. Now it has 2 methods of fire. Primary shoots plasma out. Don't worry, that explosion was caused by those plasma coils, not by the gun. But it does have a secondary fire that launches a missile. And this missile is very powerful, capable of taking out multiple enemies at once. Speaking of enemies, guess what we're talking about next? You're going to run into lots of enemies. First up, we'll go through the Imperials, the primary antagonists that you're going to fight, and home to the Stormtroopers who are on the cover, so obviously you're going to fight a lot of them. Then you have other Imperials. You have the Imperial Officers, then you have the Imperial Interrogator Droid, then you have the Imperial Probe Droid, and then you have the Imperial Commando, which is basically the ATST pilot, or the Chicken Walker pilot. You know, it kind of reminds me of a Christmas ornament breaking when you destroy those guys. Next up, you have the Mouse Droid, which aren't really enemies, but you can destroy them and pick up useful battery cells. Finally, we have the Remote. These things are fast and a pain in the ass, but you can use the Imperial Repeater Rifle to take them out. Although it was impossible due to the technological limitations of the 90s, I do wish enemy AI differentiated their behavior more. These officers were idiots and had no command presence. Next up, we have the Dianago, which is the monsters our heroes encounter in the Death Star trash compactor during A New Hope. Although I don't know what these guys eat when there's not a smuggler crawling through their sewers. Next up, we have the Grons. These are the guys with the 3 dangly eyes. Now, in the game, they're going to either throw grenades at you or try to punch you with their fists. We also have the Gamorreans. These are the giant pig guys with the axes. They are melee only, so don't let them get close. Usually, they're going to travel in groups. The Gamorreans have a lot more health and take quite a few more shots to take down. During this campaign playthrough, I don't think I was hit once by a Gamorrean. I was able to stay pretty far away from them. The Grons, they're going to throw thermal detonators at you every chance they get. They're going to surprise you with them, but if they can't, they're going to run up and punch you. Sometimes, they'll throw the grenades and hit a wall right next to them, and they'll kill themselves, which is always a plus. I'm not going to hurt you, little piggy. We're going to have some bacon. And then we have the Trandoshans, which is the species that Bossk or Bossk is, that you see in Empire Strikes Back. These guys aren't particularly strong, but they do carry the concussion rifle, which causes some significant damage to you. Best bet is to hit them with their own weapon, or maybe even lead them into a mine. And finally, we have the Dark Troopers, which are the main objectives of this game. This is the Phase 1 Trooper, kind of reminds me of Terminator from the original Terminator movies. He's pretty tough to kill, but if you get yourself a good vantage point, get some plasma coils underneath you, launch a rocket, you can take him out like a little cucaracha. Phase 2 and 3 of the Dark Trooper are both going to be cooler looking and tougher to fight with each respective iteration. Now let's take a little bit of time to talk about our main protagonist, Kyle Katarn. In the very first mission, you're going to steal the plans to the Death Star. In Rogue One, it's a completely different team that does it, so therefore this canon is null and void. But Kyle Katarn remains one of my favorite characters. You can see he inspired a lot of stuff, like the Dark Troopers from Mandalorian. This guy is an utter badass. I mean, he's not even a Jedi, and he's taken out a Kell Dragon with his bare fists. Not many Jedi you see that do that. He's a smuggler, he's a brigand, he's tough, and eventually, maybe, just maybe, he might become a little bit Force sensitive. Definitely my favorite character in Star Wars. Now, it ain't all sunshines and rainbows. There are definitely some negative aspects to this game, such as the AI that we talked about before. This boss gets stuck against the wall, and I'm able to cheese him. Don't worry, kids, Boba's just sleeping. There are plenty of deep puzzles that require a lot of thought in this game. Some of them are going to be easier than others, but this game does not hold your hand in the slightest. And some people may find that off-putting, especially when you get later in the game, you're trying really hard to figure something out, and you got that grinding 8-bit music going in the background, just builds up more and more, and it gets more and more frustrating. Personally, I loved all of it. I was able to figure out that once this stops blinking, you can go through. But I can imagine it ain't gonna be everybody's cup of tea. One of my bigger pet peeves was the lack of connection between ship parts. As you saw, the Imperial shuttle had a gap in the wings, and you can see the Moldy Crow has its tail wings hovering off to the side. Come on guys, it's 2024, we can connect those wings. Another one is the shape of the turrets. This looks like it was made in, I don't know, geometry class. They look very rudimentary. But that's pretty much it for my negative aspects of this. You can see this game inspired a lot. That looks like the droid factory scene on Geonosis in Attack of the Clones. This was a very influential game that a lot of people often overlook. Dark Forces is a revolutionary step in the advancement of the first-person shooter genre. It introduced the ability to look up and down, verticality in the battlefield, the ability to jump and crouch, as well as other difficult puzzles. While its influence may not be as palpable as Doom or Half-Life, it is still an important step in the evolution of the FPS genre. Just because the step isn't painted in yellow doesn't mean it's not there. I cannot thank Night Dive enough for bringing this to modern consoles, such a wonderful nostalgic experience. For those that stayed around, thanks for watching. Here's an awesome Star Wars medal for your troubles. I hope you enjoyed it.